Nothing is required in a transaction other than if you look at a sale agreement page in general, there's a lot of writing, like a heading maybe, right? And we have the privilege of filling in the blanks. So we're just responsible, say, for those 4 on any given page. Agent, agency, buyer name, seller name, county, APN, which is the tax ID, address, price, earnest money, down payment. And then everything else on that particular page is already pre-filled out. So you can learn, and contracts like this are written so you can understand it at a 7th grade reading level. So by virtue of actually reading these contracts, by like you would read a book, you will know everything I know about them. But the reality is, for whatever reason, we don't read them. And then we use them for our livelihood without understanding them. And then we act surprised when someone else has actually read the damn thing and catches you. Let's start with timelines. The timeline I'm going through is a contract timeline. So this could be months after you've met the person. Or it could be sometimes you get what's called a laydown, or someone that's just ready to go, which I believe is the appointment I'm going on today. This can be a super long tail. So first thing we do is we write the offer, right? That's step 1. And then usually 24 to 48 hours is the deadline for acceptance or response. Our offers should have a deadline because it's like a pre-filled. Sometimes people don't fill them out. And that means a year later I could accept that offer and they'd be bound by it if they had never rescinded it. You can rescind an offer simply by sending an email, right? So you have 24 to 48, and then after maybe some negotiations, right, you can have counters, you have acceptance. And then if it's a loan, it could be 45 to 60 days. And if it's cash, it could be 10 days. The reason we need longer with a loan is because the bank has to have an appraisal done, or they may not do an appraisal, and they need to verify the buyer's financials, and they need to make sure that the property is suitable for their use, typically through an appraisal. So cash could be as little as 10 days. Sometimes we'll do 2 weeks, sometimes we'll do 3 weeks, sometimes we do 90 days. So now we have offer and acceptance. That's usually within a few days if you're going back and forth. Counter, accept, right? And then from there, your first is your earnest money period. Earnest money is typically due within 2 business days unless you change it. So that means if the offer is accepted on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 5 o'clock, the earnest money is due. You got earnest money and then inspection, right? So we need to make sure the earnest money's in. We need to make sure the inspection is ordered and repairs are negotiated within the inspection time frame, which if you don't fill it in this contract is 10 business days. What comes after inspection period? We got a floater, seller's property disclosures. So we have a disclosures, but that disclosure time frame doesn't start until you receive them. Whenever you receive them, you have 5 business days from receipt. So sometimes the agent will send you disclosures at the beginning of the transaction. So then the disclosure timeline lines up right within your earnest money timeline. But sometimes they give it to you 2 weeks later. And so then you have like a whole new period for your buyer to review the disclosures and then accept them or reject them. And accepting is silence. So doing nothing is accepting them. Okay, you guys understand seller's disclosures? Does seller's disclosures apply to commercial property?
Yes.
Nope.
Oh.
How about five units or more? So there are no seller's disclosures for commercial property. There are no seller's disclosures for anything over 5 units. So these are specifically for 1 to 4 units. We can always ask, right, 1 to 4, residential only. Land, are there seller's disclosures for land? They exist, but they're not required. And then with a loan, you've got an appraisal contingency. Now the appraisal contingency also is a floater because it's basically when the appraisal comes in, depending on when it comes in, we usually have 2 days to agree if it's off. But a lot of people don't realize that. So appraisal comes in low, you have 2 business days to figure it out. If you don't, it automatically terminates the transaction. And then you have a financing contingency that if your buyer buys a Ferrari the day before closing and they no longer qualify for the loan, they can get their earnest money refunded and then terminate the transaction. So those are kind of like the high points. What I miss, guys? Offer acceptance, earnest money inspection period, seller's disclosures, appraisal, financing. You can have within this inspection period, there can be other inspections like well and septic, or any other contingencies that you put in broadly. Sewer scope, digging test holes if it's a vacant lot, locating property corners. Some people want the places surveyed and then they start fights. Who was out on Torrey Pines? They want to fight with the neighbors because the fence is 6 inches off. Yes. All right, let's read it. So please complete the following form. Do not leave any spaces blank. Please refer to line numbers of the questions when you provide your explanations. If you are not claiming an exclusion or refusing to provide the form, you should date and sign each page of this disclosure attachment. Each seller of residential property described in ORS 105465 must deliver this form to each buyer who makes a written offer to purchase. Refusal to provide this form gives the buyer the right to revoke their offer anytime prior to closing. Use only the sections of the form that apply to the transaction for which the form is used. If you're claiming an exclusion, fill out section 1. An exclusion may be claimed only if the seller qualifies for exclusion under the law. If not excluded, seller must disclose condition of the property, or the buyer may revoke their offer to purchase any time prior to closing the transaction. Questions regarding the legal consequences of seller's choice should be directed to a qualified attorney. Bet most of you guys never read that. So does the seller have to fill out disclosures? No, it just gives the buyer the right to revoke the offer up to the day of close with no consequences. Seller does not have to. If the seller doesn't want to, they should be directed to a qualified attorney. To fill out disclosures incorrectly is far worse than not filling them out at all. I was in depositions last Friday for a little fun bug circus I'm involved in, and one of the questions was, have there been any additions, conversions, or remodeling? It's right on the disclosures. Seller checks. No. Seller did an 8-foot addition to their master bedroom. That also was 2 stories. So it was 8 feet on 2 stories they added on. And their claim was, oh, it was an extension, not an addition. And it's like, no, you guys fucked up. Because there were permits required and they did not get permits, and they checked the wrong box, and they're in legal trouble for that. When we rep a seller, our client, they need to take their time and they need to be thorough and methodical, because this stuff gets scrutinized if it ever goes anywhere, whether it's mediation, arbitration, or a trial. Every mark on the page, every crinkle in the paper gets scrutinized. Why did you answer it that way? What was your thought process? How was that not incorrect? And the reality is, if they would have checked yes, and then permits were required and we didn't get any permits, they'd be fine, because no one reads this shit anyways. The agents don't read it, let alone the buyers, right? So whatever you do when you're repping a seller, make sure that they are thorough with their disclosures. Sometimes we do it over the phone or we're doing it together. If there's any pause, dig into it. Because if they're dishonest or lie or something's unclear, it will bite them in the ass. So just remember that. If they don't want to, they don't have to though, right? A lot of times we think. The person I'm on the merry-go-round with thought that you have to get an inspection. This person's an attorney. Well, you have to have an inspection. We're like, what? Well, right? And I'm like, yeah, what? So people don't understand this process. So it's up to us to understand it and to convey to them. And nothing's required. Nothing is required in a transaction other than offer, acceptance, and consideration. Everything else is written in. You do not have to get an inspection. You do not have to get an appraisal. You do not have to have an MLS listing. You do not have to get a title report. You do not have to have disclosures. All you need is offer, acceptance, consideration. That's it. And consideration is the exchange of money or goods for services or for real estate. Okay, so Exclusion to forms. You may claim an exclusion only if you qualify under the statute. Initial only the exclusion you wish to claim. This is the first sale of a dwelling never occupied. Brand new houses you don't have to disclose anything, which could be problematic if there's HOAs and whatnot. The sale by a financial institution that acquired the property as custodian, agent, trustee, or by foreclosure or deed in lieu. So banks. Bank-owned properties don't have to disclose. The seller is a court-appointed receiver, personal representative, trustee, conservator, or guardian. Or the sale or transfer is by a governmental agency. Governments, new builds, and court-appointed, right? So someone dies and they're the personal representative, they don't have to disclose. And if you have an exclusion, you should probably use it because the PR probably doesn't know anything about the house. If we've never seen it, we don't know anything about it, just have them say unknown, right? I tell my people, if it's unknown, we need to look into it. That's the seller indicating to us, look into this, right? But when they say no, have you ever remodeled it? No. Then we're going and we're believing what they said, it hasn't been remodeled. But if they say unknown, that we should have someone that's good at looking up county records, look up some county records or some city records or some building records. Is that fair? So the next thing we need to do is there's exclusions, and not all the exclusions to disclosures are listed here, but it's referred to in a very specific statute. Now, if you're selling a piece of property and the buyer doesn't intend to occupy it, neither the buyer nor their family intends to occupy it, there's no disclosures required. That used to be the case. If you or a family member are not moving into the place, they don't have to disclose anything. So, and the only way you would know that is if, let's say you're selling, you're buying a duplex and it's already rented out and they have year leases on them each, there's no disclosure requirement. So go back to a new construction sale agreement. All right, page 1. It's called skyboxing. So I, in this case, rep the buyer with my license number. You guys all have a license number, I hope. Firm, the firm's license number, the firm's address, my contact information. It's important that you put all of this in. Hansel and Gretel went into the cave and they left breadcrumbs so they could find their way back out. Leave breadcrumbs for people. They need to know how to contact you. They need to know who you are. You'd be surprised at what doesn't get filled out here. And then the seller's agent, or also known as a listing agent. We have his name, his license number, his firm name, its firm license number, their address, and ways to contact Ray. If there was another agent involved, repping the seller, we would do agent number 2. And then it says, see the little star, if buyers and or sellers agents and or firms are co-selling or co-listing, all agent and firm names should be disclosed above or attached in an addendum. If both parties are each represented by one or more agents of the same firm, and agents are supervised by the same principal broker, so if me and Steve Thomas, we both work at eXp Realty, that would be a case. Buyer and seller acknowledge that principal broker will become a disclosed limited agent for the buyer and seller is more fully explained in the disclosed limited agency agreement for buyers or for sellers. So it's right in there. In the event that me and Jason are repping 2 different sides of the same transaction, Jason reps the seller, I rep the buyer, Brian Benjamin, our managing broker, is the disclosed limited agent. And all that means is he can see Jason's file and Jason's clients, and he can see my file and my clients, and he can't tell me anything about him, and he can't tell him anything about me. But it's disclosed that Brian can see both sides, but Brian's going to keep his mouth shut. That's all it means. Buyer will sign this acknowledgement at the time of signing the agreement before submission to seller. Seller will sign this acknowledgement at the time this agreement is first submitted to seller. Even if this agreement will be rejected or a counteroffer will be made, seller's signature to this agency acknowledgement will not constitute acceptance of this agreement or any terms of this agreement. There will be times where your seller refuses to sign this, and you need to explain to them why they need to sign it. And in fact, all you would do is you would lift your eyes slightly higher than the signature line and read at a 7th grade level. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the buyer signed this before they sent it to us, and you will sign this acknowledgement, and all you're acknowledging is who your agent is. This is an agency acknowledgement. See the bold? If you ever get lost, look at the bold shit. Hey, Mr. Seller, this is the new construction sale agreement final agency acknowledgement. See how they even like contrasted it for you? Like they know agents aren't super intelligent sometimes. So they make it really easy It's bold. Buyer agent information. I think that's where I put my name. All right, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, here are the general terms of the sale agreement. This agreement is intended to be a legally binding contract. If it is not understood, seek competent legal advice before signing. For an explanation of the printed terms and provisions in this form, seller and buyer are encouraged to closely review Section 47 and Section 48. No changes or alterations are permitted to any portion of this pre-printed format or text of this form. Any such proposed changes or alterations must be made on a separate document, which is an addendum. Okay, so we don't scratch things out of this contract because that's the practice of law. Party, price description, price. Parties, buyer, seller, county. And if you look, all this is pre-filled because I filled out a regular purchase agreement. And so once you fill out one, it cascades everywhere. So we could change this stuff. So you can see that. So once I put the buyer name here, it cascades to the entire document. So if I want to change it, I have to go back to the first instance where it exists. Price, address, always use a second identifier, which is the tax ID, especially with land, Sometimes there's multiple parcels. It's always good to pick up the phone. Hey, just one lot. And then in the MLS, they have the APN or tax ID. You click on it, it'll open a new page that is the county records associated with that tax ID. So I always, whenever we have a new listing, I click the tax ID to make sure that the address is matched. Because if you fat finger it in a 6 instead of a 7, then it'll be a different parcel and then everything can get screwed up. Purchase price, booyah baby. Earnest money, typically 1%, plus or minus around there. In this case, it was cash, so there was no down payment. And so due at close via a deed. You always check deed. We're not doing land sales contracts. This is due within 3 business days, the 3,000 to the title company, and that's due at closing. Fixtures, controls, keys, right? You guys know what a fixture is? Permanently affixed to the house. Yes, easiest way to do that, flip the house upside down and shake it. Everything that falls out is personal property. Everything that doesn't fall out is a fixture. Think lights, doors, roof, cabinets, countertops, those are affixed to the property. Fixtures will include but not be limited to built-in appliances, floor coverings, drapery rods, curtain rods, window door screens, storm doors, and windows system fixtures. For example, irrigation, plumbing, ventilation, cooling and heating, water heaters, attached electric light and bathroom fixtures, light bulbs, fluorescent lamps, window blinds, awnings, fences, all planted shrubs, plants, and trees except. This is very important to read this to your client. They want to take the drapes. The drapes are a fixture. If they want to take the drapes, you need to put seller is taking the drapes, right? All keys. Seller can't keep a key. Garage door opener, that stays. So we've just defined what's staying. And then if we don't know this and we're not telling our clients and they take the curtain rods, it ends up on our heads because they didn't read it and we didn't read it, right? And the buyer's agent didn't read it, but the buyer read it. See how that works? Now, only the following personal property in as-is condition and at no stated value is included. It has to be in as-is condition and it has to be no stated value. If it's not, it can screw up your loan. Even if they're paying for it, just put it in the purchase price or do it outside of escrow completely. So we know this is what's included. In everything that's not included, you got to tell us if you're leaving it. Couches, food, whatever, right? So if you're taking the water heater, just say, taking water heater. In this section, funds mean the funds required for closing the property, whether they are the deposits, down payment, or if this is an all cash transaction, the full purchase price. Liquid funds are cash or immediately convertible to cash that are available to buyer. Buyer represents that upon signing this agreement, I check the box, all funds are liquid. So that means all $340,000 are available now in cash or something convertible to cash. Not a car, not a 401k, not another house. It's in the bank or it's in a money market. So maybe it's gold, right? Maybe it's stock that they have to sell. So you have to identify if it's non-liquid funds. If you say, hey, the down payment is coming from 401k, and then you have to call the seller's agent 2 days before close and explain to them that you can't close because the down payment hasn't been released from the 401k, they're gonna go, oh, okay, you disclosed that to us. We'll extend it because you said you were waiting for this, and indeed you are waiting for it. But if you were up here and said all funds are liquid, they may say, screw you, we're taking your earnest money. Because we wouldn't have accepted the offer had we known that we'd wait 8 weeks for your 401k company to disperse. Does that make sense? Or this transaction is contingent upon buyer obtaining liquid funds in accordance with the following contingency. Typically, what you would put here is the sale of a house, right? Because above, we just said we have all the money that we need to close, purchase price, down payment, whatever. So if we don't, right, I need to sell a house, sell a car, sell a business, whatever it is. So then this would be transaction is contingent on, that means it doesn't close until this happens.